What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you through the fixture guide to the opening few game weeks of the season. Now, as I always say, if you guys have watched this channel for a long time, I always say the fixtures are the bread and butter of any draft. So hopefully this video is going to make it a bit easier for you to make those drafts. Now in this video, I'll be going over my own ratings of the attack and the defense. And then to wrap up, I'll be going over some defensive rotations of a couple teams I like. So that's what you guys are interested in. Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So as mentioned, I'll be going over attack and defensive ratings that I've actually made myself. Now don't worry, it's not too complex. I've actually gone quite simple on this. I'll be taking the XG non-penalty of each team from last season, and then the XG conceded of that specific opponent from last season as well. Now the reason I use the non-penalty variant is I just prefer it in terms of XG, but the best thing about this is that you guys can use whatever stat you want to in your own ratings, but I'm going to stick to some simple metrics for now. Now I just want to clarify one thing, because you might be asking what stat did I use for the promoted sides. Well, I used the middle of the relegated teams from last year. I think it was Burnley or Luton. In terms of each stat, as promoted sides generally struggle on the step up to the Premier League. So this method is not perfect, but we have to kind of choose an okay representation of each of these sides. So that's what we'll be using for now. So in terms of the attack, I used the XG non-penalty of the specific squad. I then times it by the XG conceded of their opponent, and then ranked the top 6 teams. So let's take a look at those top 6 sides. At the moment, it's Fulham, Crystal Palace, Aston Villa, Liverpool, Southampton, and finally Nottingham Forest. So a few surprise entries and teams I don't own in my actual drafts. Now out of each of these squads, at least there has been a few players that I've been looking at. For example, with Fulham, we've got Muniz. He might be one of the standout budget forwards. Crystal Palace, I had Eze in my first draft, maybe Mateta if he comes back from the Olympics earlier. He could be one of the strikers to look at. And then with Aston Villa, it's pretty set on an Ollie Watkins, but Leon Bailey and Rodgers might be good budget midfielders. Finally with Liverpool, Mo Salah's the talk of the town at the moment, but could someone like a Szoboszlai, who scored in pre-season, emerge as an option, or one of the other forwards from Liverpool. Then with Southampton, probably Armstrong the only selection I'm looking at, but he could be a nice budget entry. And Nottingham Forest also with Chris Wood. So nice to see we have some kind of budget forwards here with Chris Wood, Muniz, as well as Armstrong. I'm also looking at someone like an Elanga or a Hudson-Odoi at the moment, and that's because of these good fixtures. So let's take a look at the fixtures. Well, first of all, I used the first 6 game weeks to get this ranking. The reason I went for 6 games was that a lot of people are looking at wildcard potentially around that game week 6 mark. And just generally in terms of FPL, we always use 6 games as a metric. Now you guys can go for a longer time frame, a shorter time frame, but let's stick with 6 games for now. So I'm going to put the fixtures on screen right now, and you guys will notice I've not included the FPL fixture ratings. I've gone for an alternate kind of game week by game week basis here. I sometimes find the FPL ratings to be not that great, so let's stick with no color ratings for the moment. Now let's start off with the first team there, Fulham. You'll notice they face United, Leicester, Ipswich, West Ham, Newcastle, and finally Nottingham Forest. And you might notice that a lot of these teams do face Manchester United. Now I'm here to remind you, if you guys weren't focused on the stats last season, towards the end, Manchester United had the worst XG conceded out of any team. And that's really coming back to bite them this Premier League season. Now obviously if they do improve, that's going to make this fixture a lot tougher. But on paper at the moment, this is an absolute green fixture. Now Fulham also face back-to-back newly promoted sides, which is going to come in clutch. And they also have a game at home against West Ham, who also are bad defensively. The Newcastle game might be a little bit hit or miss, just depends how they set up this Premier League season, and they face Nottingham Forest in game week 6. Now Crystal Palace as well, they also have some newly promoted sides. You'll notice that in a lot of these teams. The only tough game might be that Brentford or Chelsea away one. Also Everton in game week 6, they were quite good defensively towards the end of last season. So even though the stats might say these fixtures are quite strong, when you analyze them, a lot of these games might be quite average. Aston Villa, if you guys aren't going for Ollie Watkins, this might make you think otherwise. They have a pretty tough game in game week 2 against Arsenal at home, basically the worst game that you can have. In between that though, they've got West Ham, Leicester, and then 2 home games back to back against Everton and Wolves, before ending in game week 6 with a newly promoted side as well. Liverpool on the reverse end have Ipswich away in game week 1, and then that usual United away game in game week 3. Now between that home fixtures against Brentford, Forest, and Bournemouth, and I can see quite a few goals in these fixtures. Finally, Southampton, the only newly promoted side, which tells you these fixtures must be strong because the XG non-penalty of Southampton in my ratings isn't that great. So you might want to heavily consider Armstrong if no other budget forwards kind of emerge. But some great fixtures here, other newly promoted sides at home, as well as Manchester United. Newcastle and Brentford away might be slightly tough though. Now finally, Nottingham Forest, and if you have looked at the fixtures for Nottingham Forest, they've got 3 green fixtures to start off the season, and I can probably agree with that. Liverpool, Brighton away might be up in there, but both these sides weren't great defensively last season, which probably explains why they're here. But these 6 teams, interestingly enough, your Man Cities aren't here. They have a little bit of a tougher run apparently. But some of these sides might be quite differential, and that's why my eyes are going to be on them. Comment down below if there's a team that you think that has great attacking fixtures that's not going to be here. I was quite surprised that Chelsea aren't here, but I think game week 1 against Man City, that's probably going to be quite a tough one. But after that, they have a sea of green. Now just remember, this is my own kind of ranking system. You guys can do what you want with your own stats. And comment down below if you guys find a nice combination of stats that might be better than this one. Now let's hop into the defensive ratings, and as mentioned, we're now going to do the inverse of the attacking numbers. I'll be using the XG conceded of the actual team divided by the XG on penalty of their opponent. Now there will be some similarities here, as good fixtures from an attacking point of view usually are good from a defensive point of view, but we have had some shake-up in the order. So Aston Villa number 1, Liverpool number 2, followed by Fulham, Forest, Chelsea, and finally Newcastle. So now you see Chelsea emerge with that sea of green from game week 2 onwards. Now once again, the opening 6 games, let's bring those fixtures up on screen. And now you guys can see why I'm considering Konza as my 4.5 defender. I'm not going to repeat the fixtures because they're quite similar. I guess what I'll say from a defensive point of view is these do look quite strong for Aston Villa, especially those home games against Everton and Wolves. If you can find a rotation pair, which I will show you shortly, for game week 2, if Konza locks down that fullback slot, he could be good value. Now Liverpool is not what I want to see. As kind of a fan, I want to bring Trent or Robertson in. If the stats are telling me the fixtures are good, this might be too tempting, as I would love a Liverpool defender. So on paper, the fixtures also look pretty strong here. My only concern is under the new manager, how they're going to perform defensively, so it might be a wait and see for me. Otherwise, Fulham and Nottingham Forest might be outside punts for some cheap options. I know the Forest goalkeeper might be a selection we look for in pre-season. The one thing I will note though about Fulham from a defensive point of view is they've just lost Paulinho to Bayern Munich, and I haven't seen them replace that position at the moment. So obviously a massive miss, as he was a rock in midfield. How's that going to impact the defense? That's a wait and see, but it's one thing to keep your mind on. So let's focus now on Chelsea and Newcastle, because these two teams are quite popular in most people's drafts, and you can understand it as you see from game week 2 onwards for Chelsea. Now, do you think these fixtures are better from a defensive or an attacking point of view? I know Chelsea just conceded 4 to Celtic, but I could see some clean sheets here from game week 2 onwards. I just wish maybe a Reece James was going to be back fit, and if he stayed fit, because that's a perfect combination of defensive and attacking returns. With Newcastle, will Kieran Trippier leave and Livramento become the best budget option? I don't actually know if I favour these fixtures too much from a defensive point of view. I mean, Bournemouth away, Wolves away, as well as Fulham, I can see all those sides potentially scoring, and then their 2 home games against Spurs and Man City. Game week 1 though might be a lock-in unless you go for Armstrong in your forward line, and that's I've actually eliminated Dan Burn from my draft at the moment. I don't know if you guys do agree with me, but I think the away games might be tough, and their home games where you expect them to perform quite well are against Spurs and Man City. I can't see clean sheets in those 2 games. Other teams, like we saw Crystal Palace had good kind of attacking fixtures, those also look pretty strong. You must also remember that Crystal Palace under the new manager did improve defensively, and my stats are for the whole season. But like the attack, let me know the defensive options or teams that you guys are also targeting. The fixtures at the start of the season are a little bit of a mixed bag. So now coming from the ranking of the attack and the defensive fixtures over the opening 6 games, what I'm going to do now is show you guys some more budget teams for defensive rotation, as this is what I'm doing in my current team. So I don't know about you guys, but if you have a defense of Guardiola, Gabriel, and Trent, you probably can skip this part, as you'll be playing those defenders every single game week. But if you're like myself, you've probably got one premium kind of defender at the moment, and the rest are super cheap. So let's go over some teams that offer some good rotations. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to showcase 5 teams. I'm not going to be going over only 2 and show you rotation pairs, but out of these 5 teams, you guys can find your perfect rotation pairs. So the 5 teams I want to focus on are going to be Fulham, Crystal Palace, Aston Villa, Everton, and finally Southampton. And that Southampton slot is going to be Harwood Bellis at the 4.0 mark. So you probably don't want to play him every single game week, to be honest, as he is quite cheap. So definitely focus on the first 4 teams. So all these options do offer 4.5s, Robinson for example from Fulham, Anderson my favorite 4.5 from Crystal Palace, Konza at 4.5 for Aston Villa, and finally Mikalenko from Everton. So let's bring the fixtures on screen right now, and I'm going to assume that you guys don't have any defense and therefore you need 3 defenders. So I'll be showcasing the 3 players I would be featuring every single week, and they're going to be in green. Now I'm not saying that you guys have to go for these 5 teams. What you guys will then do is kind of tailor this to how many defenders you need. For example, I only need 2 defenders, as I will be starting my premium defender every single game week. So now looking at the fixtures, you can see that your Southampton asset you probably will be benching every game week apart from game week 5, which is quite nice when Fulham have Newcastle and Crystal Palace have United. If you are going to be targeting some home fixtures, you guys can get a very nice rotation between, for example, Everton and Fulham or Crystal Palace, as their alternating home games are where you're going to play them. The one team I also want to focus on is going to be Aston Villa. You guys can see out of the kind of green fixtures they do have the most, they honestly have some great games apart from game week 2. That's why I'm hoping that Konza does lock down that fullback slot, as they did have some good defensive stats second half of last season. Now if I had to eliminate one team here, it might actually be those Everton assets. Their home games against Brighton, Bournemouth and Crystal Palace might be slightly tough, but under Sean Dyche, they're an absolute defensive giant. So that's purely in terms of the fixtures, but I guess you could do the same for Fulham. You're only starting them 3 out of the 6 game weeks, but you could always start them in game week 6 against Forest away. My current rotation is probably going to be between Crystal Palace, Aston Villa. I'll have Harwood Bellis on the bench at 4.0 and currently looking at Robinson from Fulham. As mentioned, I have dropped Dan Burn from my current team, but if Livramento emerges in Kieran Trippier's absence, I do like him from an attacking point of view. But let me know in the comments down below, what's your defensive rotation at the moment? Have I missed a team like a Brentford? I'm currently looking at them from a goalkeeper point of view though, or is there another out there team that I simply have missed? I generally love these kind of rotation pairs, whether it be your 2 or 3 defenders. This season with the bonus point changes, defenders might not be that desirable, and there's some great options at 4.5 million. So this is a little taste of rotations and also some of the best fixtures from an attack and a defensive point of view. Throughout the preseason, I'll be going back to this kind of guide and assessing more fixtures and stats. I just wanted to give you guys a simple analysis to help you with some of those first drafts. So this is basically a wrap of the video, guys. Hope you guys did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like if you didn't subscribe if you have subscribed yet. Tons of content still coming up, so make sure those notifications are turned on. But for the time being, I'm signing off. It's me, Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.